first part of this presentation in talking about the next generation of financial services. The reason why I'm bringing this up first is I'm giving you a real-world perspective of where the industry is heading. Some of the questions you want is, most of you had asked for trading, the business, the stacking, and everything else. How many of you actually have done the blockchain, which I was told, some blockchain 101 courses? So you understand the basics, right? The block, why it's called blockchain, the chain of blocks, the nonce, and the entire fundamental elements of it, right? But if you're not, I will spend some time later on this, but I'm starting with a fairly high level, and I'll drill deeper down into as the day progresses. So I have 3 parts in the first session, and I actually had built this for a client. I modified this for the class a little bit. Is token. What is it? What is a token? And what is the elements and some of the tenets of a token? Why is it important now? And token, by the way, is not new, right? So I'll spend some time in defining what the hell it is. Like, what is token and what gives token its value? So when you look at Solana and Cardano and many of the derivative tokens that are coming from layer 1 protocols and everything else, then you look at Doge and Shibu, and they are a meme coin of sorts that's driven by a tweet from Elon Musk, for example. I always question what gives it a value. And then I go back to in this space, I was a technologist, and I read multiple books of evolution of money itself, like what we value as money. What is a rupee? What's a dollar? What does it really represent? And at the end of the day, it's a belief system. And India, it's even more interesting because gold was a predominant element. It still is the case. We have a massive belief system in gold more than the money itself. And oftentimes there's a parallel between gold and Bitcoin for a reason, and we'll expand on that. So I'll spend some time on token-driven revolution and how it's defining decentralized finance. But there's a bigger ecosystem evolving, which many of you have touched upon, is metaverse and NFTs. And the reason why I say this is because there are 8 billion people on this planet. How many of you really love finance? How many of you okay, there's like a handful. So you are a minority in this world. No one likes banks. No one likes finance. No one is inclined, wake up in the morning, like, how do I do these amazing things? But everybody loves music. You all have a hobby. You love sports. And this is where the digital marketing comes into play. So all the things we've done with Nike, as you heard with Budweiser, what we've seen with some of the Gucci and many of the LVMH, which is Louis Vuitton. I still can't figure out why people pay, and maybe ladies can explain me why you pay all that kind of money for a bag. I just don't get it, but there is maybe some belief system, some element. So that then defines as to what gives token its value. And then there's a DeFi stack, decentralized finance, and DeFi stack is mature now. We've been at this for a decade. So it's a bit more mature, and I'll describe the different layers, and we'll discuss to what give token its value. But the bigger thing you realize, that same stack you have for decentralized financing, which is primarily for finance, you have the same stack for other facets of the blockchain industry. NFTs, your digital marketing, your ability to be able to use metaverse and go into gaming. Who was from gaming? You, right?
Yes, sir.
Rashi's, okay. That's Rajbir. Rajbir, so you were looking into gaming. So gaming is an interesting area. I don't understand gaming either, right? And I had to ask my 17-year-old kid to say, hey, what does it do? Like, why do you need a sword? Why do you need to do all these things? So he explained to me. And what's even more interesting is that generation, I asked him, like, hey, you're wasting your time on these games. Why don't you go and play Axie Infinity and make some money from it? Play to earn, right stuff. And his next response was, we live in the US, energy is expensive. He said, yeah, Ether is too expensive. So this is like a kid who doesn't know anything about finance, but he had to make a relation between an Axie and why he cannot do this with Ether, because Ether is expensive. Because you need Ether to buy Axie, and Ether is like $3,000 at the time. So he said, it's more expensive for me to play this game, so the economics don't add up. That was a 1 split-second response from the next generation. So oftentimes we do compare, for many of you in blockchain world, is when I moved to the US, we didn't have internet. So I'm dating myself at the moment. But the reason why we moved is because education, like every county, every university had amazing libraries. There were no limitations, and information was easily available. And we all were aspired to go into that because there was a whole intellectual era evolving. This is pre-internet era time frame. Then came internet. And almost in year 2000, the entire global population was the same information playing field. Our kids played the same games, they had the same information, they didn't have any information lag. As long as you had internet, you can do whatever the hell you want to do with it. And we aspire to create the same system with blockchain. Is today any kid anywhere, any person, any farmer in any part of rural India or Uganda or Tanzania has access to the same information, maybe a little slow because of internet speeds. And that leveled the playing field of access to information. And proliferation of disinformation, which is a big part of digital marketing areas that you should look into. Is to me, the biggest crisis of our generation now is misinformation, disinformation. Is ability at which the rapid dissemination of information goes on. That also creates all kinds of censorship elements. So if many of you have done blockchain, the big ethos of this industry is censorship resistance. We don't want anybody to be able to tell us what to do. So it's an interesting dichotomy of that thought process where we have this technical framework, we are building DeFi, we're building blockchain, we're having tokenized elements. When we go into Web 3.0, you'll realize as to how there's a tussle between the fact that what information age has enabled us to do, it's also working against what we want to do. And there comes born is Web 3.0 is giving us the control of our data, of our information in tokenized form. So the whole element of the whole L1, L2 layers of tokens, that's changing the way we do things. And that's essentially the fundamental premise of this course, or this 2 days that we will be here, is for you to understand that what internet has done, and we're building on top of internet, which has its pluses and negatives, is what is a token, what gives token its value, and where do you go from here, from that perspective. So can anyone give me an example of a token before today, before the Ethereum and Bitcoin revolution? What is a token? The answer is on the board, but give me another example about the. So when you go to a movie theater, you buy a token, or you buy a ticket. I used to back in the day paper tickets, now you have mobile tickets. Or when you go to an amusement park, you buy a token or you buy a pass. That obfuscates a lot of complexity from you having to pay at every gate, you having to pay at every ride. So that takes away the financial transaction of it. It is a representation of where you are. For technologies in the room, you have SAML tokens, you have OAuth. These are all some of the elements of the fact that you have tokenized element of your identity that you don't have to go and enter your username and password every single time or every different modules in enterprise application systems. Right, so back in the day, you switch from one link to another link, it pops up another password, and we said this is painful. So why don't we create so these were tokenized form of different things. Right, and nothing has really changed in the blockchain world except that we are building tokenized form of who we are. So if we look at NFTs, the biggest application of non-fungible token is us, our identity, is applying the ability for us to go and do things in the crypto world with non-repudiation, which means you cannot go and say, I didn't do it, right? So those are some of the elements of so it's very old. This has been happening from ages. This is in 8th century, when the initial genesis of coins came with the trading happening in the Roman Empire and some of the other elements. They were saying that this is too hard for us to barter. And so they said, we'll just take the sovereign issued, because at the time it was metal, and metal then became the fact that Romans and some of the early days Chinese were able to Chinese created the paper money, Romans created the actual Lydia coins, which basically gave you the fact that I can carry this in a bag. And that gave me an ability to transfer things. Now, the question for you is, what is that called? What does a rupee do for you? Come on, think. Medium of exchange, true, it's unit of account. So for many of you who don't know the 3 properties of any currency, including cryptocurrency, one is medium of exchange, unit of account. Man, this is store of value. Awesome. So these are 3 properties of any currency in the world. Gold cannot be a currency anymore because it's just store of value. You don't go to buy coffee with gold. There's no way to exchange gold because somebody has to have the entire apparatus to measure the gold, and you can't chop pieces of gold and all that challenge with it. So what rupee gives you are 3 fundamental elements, though I question very much of the fiat's ability to store value. Inflation eats into where things are, the monetary policies, and there's a whole complexity of who controls the money, which is being questioned today, which is not questioned for the past, I would say, 200 plus years, since the emergence of central banking system, and then emergence of divorcing ourselves from gold standard. But the question is, the medium exchange unit of account gives you an element called fungibility. How many of you heard the term? Good, so it makes it fungible. So, which means it allows you to be able to go and exchange a token or anything of tokenized value, including rupee. Rupee is tokenized. It's a belief system of the country, right? And the policies, which means if somebody screws up somewhere up there, or if we choose not to believe in it, which is what happened in Venezuela and Zimbabwe, then it's a problem. No matter how much money you print, if people don't use it, it doesn't provide you with the unit of account or medium of exchange. People switch to something else. And that's why Bitcoin is dominant in many of the economies that are downtrodden with bad economic policies and have hyperinflation, for instance, because no longer is that fungible unit of exchange is there. So tokens is hovering around. Whatever we do in these next few days, you need to think in your mind what gives a token its value. So Dogecoin, for example, I give this an every. I researched into early days, and now it's impossible to research every single technical stack of every single coin, because there are, anybody, how many coins do you have out there? Give me an approximate number, because even I don't know what's happening today or what happened since this morning. 30 million coins.
5 to 10,000.
15,888 by my previous calculation. So it's impossible for you to keep track of everything. So you have to build a foundation. You've got to build a foundation of what gives it its value. And I start with those three. And there are other esoteric elements in terms of NFTs. NFT becomes, like something that your mom passed on from generation to generation. That's of emotional value to you. It may not be of value to anybody else, but it's of value to you. And that's what NFTs represent, right? But the question is, when you take your family heirloom, right, which has been passed on from 5 generations, bank doesn't recognize it. Bank knows that it's gold. The value of gold is of so much rupees per tola. And I'm going to give you a instrument like a debt in exchange of keeping this as a collateral. But for you, it has tremendous value than just an element of gold. And so I did travel. How many of you heard of Yap? So the original Bitcoin. So in almost 12,000 years ago, the island of Yap is in South Pacific in Palau. It takes 3 days to even get there with 4 or 5 flights. But I had to go and research this piece. So I went there, and they used to carve out these rare coins. And those coins would be kept. This is every Bitcoin conference they would talk about this, right? They would just keep they keep the round stone in one corner, and then they would ask. Then they would know who owns it, right? They would know that if I own the coin and I gave it to Mohawk, for example, then the whole village would know that the coin has transferred from Nitin to Mohawk, and that's essentially a distributed ledger. So they were essentially mining for coins, because they would go to these quarries in Palau. They had special stone which had some special characteristics, and they had the spiritual elements of gods and everything else. And they would carry those coins on, mine it. So again, the vernacular is the same. They would actually mine the coins. They would create the round, and they would have a hole in between, because the hole allowed them to sort of roll the coin with those crowbars and bring it back on the ship. And if the value of the coin depended on the difficulty of mining it. This is not when Bitcoin didn't even exist, which means how many people, how much time it took, how many boats you had, and many of them sunk. And the sunk coins had more value because it was super hard to now get. And so there were still villages and tribes, and I actually met those tribes, who still believe in the value of the sunk, no pun intended, of the sunk coin in the ocean, to say that's ours, that belongs to this family. So the question that we had to be asking is, that's NFT for you in general, is what gives you the element of uniqueness, what is the eye of beholder. But there's a whole new slew of things called financialization of NFTs. How many of you heard of that? So with Bitcoin, Ether, truly fungible asset, layer ones, you can exchange anywhere in the world today. You can have a Bitcoin, and you are able to, so in Vietnam, you're in Philippines, you're in India, you have Bitcoin. Every exchange, every single crypto industry accepts some of the fungible units. So that's become like a US dollar of today. Anybody accepts Bitcoin, everybody accepts Ether. There are a dozen of handful truly fungible currencies that provide all 3 of these characteristics for you to be able to go. So if whether you're in the Philippines or you're in India or in the United States, the value of Bitcoin remains the same. So that egalitarian system that we're talking about, a currency, no longer requires a step-through currency like a US dollar, GBP, pound, euro, and yen, which is the basket currency in the world, which we use as step-through currency, which means if you go to Nigeria or you go to non-basket currency world, for anybody to exchange a rupee, they have to exchange rupee into dollar and dollar into something else. That's how these, so that's a step through currency. No longer is the case. You have Bitcoin. Bitcoin has a direct exchange mechanism. So you remove the transactional cost, transactional elements of the ability to involve people, transaction systems that handle the step through piece of that system, which is fundamental challenge with the existing financial system. So if you want to buy an American stock, again, remember the reason why some of us left back in the day, because we needed opportunities, we needed to have this intellectual explosion to say we have access to all this knowledge we can get. And coming from our community, which is thriving on knowledge, we all said, okay, let's go where knowledge is available. Similarly, in this case today, is we begin to compare as to, by removing the intermediaries of the existing financial system, any of you who's living here, if you have to invest into Tesla, what is required? Tanuj. Yeah, what is required for you to have an American or foreign stock? You have to first have a brokerage account. You have to have a minimum account in that. The brokerage account itself cannot deal with things, so they have to have access to a Forex. Forex would have access to another entity which have access to the stock. So even though you will never have the stock, it'll be all kept in some custody bank in the US. They'll have partnership. So there are 7, 8, 9, 12 entities involved in you owning a Tesla stock. What happens to these 12 people? Well, they're not really interested in your financial future, are they? They get commissions out of this whole thing. This is where it gets draining. So you cannot simply put $100 of your hard-earned income into some stock that you want to invest in, or real estate, which is the digital marketing element comes into play, which goes back to the same reason why information economy was such a burden. Suddenly we are moving towards this whole model to say, if I create an egalitarian system, can anybody in the world go into what we call synthetic securities? How many of you heard of the term synthetic securities? Synthetic securities, I'll connect the dots in a minute. I'm going all over the place, but it'll all come together. These are all tokenized. So if you want to buy a rupee worth of Tesla stock, you should be able to do it. Because you can today buy a rupee worth of Bitcoin. You can buy a rupee worth of 1 rupee worth of any of the crypto assets, because the tokenization allows you to do things like fractionalization. So you can take element of a big token, split into 100 different pieces, or and hopefully the 100 pieces come together as a single asset class. But you are able to do those things. Question?
Yeah, just one, as you mentioned the story of Yap.
Yeah.
Like in India, especially in the ghats of Banaras, they are priests who are maintaining the record.
I know. Yeah.
What is the example of, what is that kind of?
So the example of ghats, Banaras, I've traveled the whole country when I was young. My father used to get this 4-year LTCs as a government employee, and I had the fortune of seeing this amazing. I want to do it again with my kid at some point. But the element of, that's provenance. So if you go to, and there's also in Tamil Nadu, where they actually have apparently scriptures. Yeah, they have scriptures on every single person on this planet apparently. So you can give your name and you can give your date of birth and everything else, and they will go and hunt it down. Besides the awe and amaze of where the hell did that information come from, right? Talking about openness and privacy and everything else. But to me, the Ghats of Banaras represent a provenance, which means that you had a community, you had a sect, and that community evolved over time, and people kept these records, and the records are preserved in these scrolls and these scriptures, which are perishable. The only difference I see from what's happening in Banaras and what's happening in blockchain is immutable. And it's indestructible because of the fact that it's decentralized. Whereas a fire could potentially jeopardize unless they're making copies or handwritten copies of these scriptures or scrolls, right? So then the question then becomes, which is what happened with how many of you heard of Constitution DAO? Constitution DAO, right? So this is basically US Constitution. Constitution DAO was, so basically you had the original US Constitution. And I spent some time, I lived there for 30 years now, so I researched what US Constitution is all about. As a citizen, you have to go and pass these tests and everything else. But the thing is that the government is very decentralized. That's why nothing happens. It's as dysfunctional as any of the political system in the world. But the Constitution DAO was a DAO that was formed, decentralized autonomous organization, something you should keep in your vernacular. And they basically said, can we have a copy of, there were 15 copies handwritten, distributed, because they didn't have photocopiers, they didn't have any of this thing in early 18th century. And so they basically passed on these 15 copies for the different sect which came to become a Congress later for them to read. So there were originally 13 colonies, and those colonies came together to form what is today called the United States of America, right? One of the copies still left. The original Constitution is still in Smithsonian's, right? So it's preserved, it's like, super security. You may have seen that in movies and everything else. But the copy of those, one of the original 15 copies, only one is left. So you have element of scarcity, what gives token a value, so keep that in mind. You have element of scarcity, you have element of symbolism. That's why Dogecoin is valuable, because it symbolizes something. We can discuss that in a minute. So it has symbolism, it has value, it has history, and it has value. So it's sort of like an NFT. Symbolism, history. So symbolism is, it's constitution, which means that, a lot of immigrants who came from all these, early days in late 18th century, they found refuge in the United States after World War II, and they gave money to this cause to say, it is because of the United States I got a place to live and I flourished, I did well. So you had all these emotions pour into it. And they went and acquired this copy, and actually they lost because there was one billionaire who actually bought it, and he gave it to a library in Arkansas. But the question was that, can I own a piece of the history that gave my Jewish parents who were persecuted in that era? That became emotional for most people. Exactly example to our heirloom of our community, when we pass on jewelry from generation to generation. So these are all tokenized form of the modern system that we are building, which is truly a financial system that goes into it. So ease of storage and handling. No longer you have to move this massive gold bricks from your family to another. I'm just kidding. But no point in taking this Banaras scrolls and keeping them safe and not knowing what things are. And then you have foundation for new business models, which is basically, if I can take that token, which means it's kept somewhere safe, the Constitution, for example, or let's say we tokenize the scrolls from Banaras, then we tokenize that, and suddenly we all have a stake in it. We all own a piece of it. And that ownership gives us pleasure, joy, gives us a sense of belonging, symbolism, history, whatever that case is. And that's essentially what NFTs generally give value.